The first thing I noticed was that her hands were shaking. Not trembling slightly the way hands shake when you're cold, or nervous before a presentation. I mean genuinely shaking. The way you shake when you've been holding something impossibly heavy for far too long and your body finally decides it can't pretend anymore. It was the night of our firm's annual holiday dinner, held at the Fairmont Chateau Laurier in Ottawa, the kind of event where people wear their best blazers and laugh a little too loudly at things that aren't quite funny, where the salmon is always slightly overdone but nobody says anything because the view of the Rideau Canal is beautiful enough to make you forget. It was December, the canal half frozen, the Parliament buildings lit up gold against a sky that couldn't decide between purple and black. The kind of beautiful that makes you feel a little sad without knowing why. And there she was, Beverly Ashworth, Regional Director of Operations for the entire Eastern Division of Hartwell Infrastructure Group, standing alone near the window at the far end of the room, holding a glass of white wine she hadn't touched, staring out at the water like she was trying to find something she'd lost a long time ago. I almost didn't walk over. I almost turned around and went back to the bar, ordered another Rickard's Red, and spent the rest of the night talking to my colleagues about Hawk's standings and RRSP contribution limits the way we always did. But something stopped me. I don't know what, some instinct, some quiet nudge I still can't fully explain. I picked up my drink and walked toward her. What happened next changed everything I thought I knew about strength, leadership, and what it means to stay. My name is James Okafor, and 18 months ago I was about to walk away from the best opportunity I had ever been given. I grew up in Windsor, Ontario, the youngest of 3 kids in a house that was always just a little too small and a little too loud and exactly right in every way that matters. My dad, Franklin, drove a city bus for 31 years. My mom, Adeze, worked at a dry cleaning shop on Wyandotte Street until her knees gave out, and then she worked the front counter instead, because she wasn't the type to stop. They came from Lagos in 1991 with 2 suitcases and a plan that was more hope than blueprint, and somehow they made it work. Not easily, but completely. They raised me to believe that if you show up, if you do the work, and if you treat people with basic human decency, things will eventually go your way. Simple math. I believed it. What they didn't prepare me for was Beverly Ashworth. I joined Hartwell Infrastructure Group fresh out of a civil engineering program at the University of Waterloo. I was 27, sharp enough to know I didn't know everything, hungry enough to work late most nights without being asked. Hartwell was a mid-sized firm doing serious work: bridges, transit corridors, municipal water systems across Ontario and Quebec, real work. Work that mattered. Landing a junior project coordinator position there felt like stepping through a door I'd been knocking on for years. Then I met my direct supervisor. Beverly Ashworth had a reputation that arrived in the room before she did. The other coordinators warned me on my first day, not unkindly, but with the specific tone of people who have already learned something the hard way and want to spare you the same lesson. She's precise, they said. She doesn't do small talk. Don't bring her a problem without bringing her 3 possible solutions first, and whatever you do, don't waste her time. I listened. I nodded. And then I thought quietly that I could handle it. I was wrong. Not because she was cruel. She wasn't. She never raised her voice. She never embarrassed anyone in a meeting or talked down to the junior staff. But she was cold in a way that was almost clinical efficient, in a way that left no room for anything human around the edges. Her feedback on my reports was precise and devastating. She found things I had missed at 3 in the morning that I had stared at for hours without seeing. She had a way of asking questions that made you feel, somehow, that the question itself was already a mild form of disappointment. For the first 4 months, I told myself it was fine. Told myself I was learning, sharpening, getting better, and I was. But somewhere around month 5, something in me started to crack. I'd stay late to get the project timeline right and receive an email at 11:47 p.m. pointing out a formatting inconsistency I hadn't noticed. I'd run numbers 3 times before a meeting, and she'd ask the one question I hadn't prepared for. It started to feel less like development and more like erosion. I began to think she simply didn't rate me, that she'd decided early on I wasn't quite the right fit and was professionally tolerating me while quietly waiting for me to figure that out on my own. By the time December arrived, I had already drafted my resignation letter twice. The second draft was better than the first. I'd saved it on my personal laptop at home, a document called janplans.docx that I opened and closed more nights than I'd like to admit. I hadn't sent it yet, But I was close. I gave myself until the new year. If things hadn't changed, I'd leave quietly in January, give proper notice, and go find something that didn't make me feel like I was failing at standing still. Then came the Chateau Laurier dinner. I almost skipped it. These events always felt like mandatory socializing dressed up as optional celebration. And I was tired enough that the idea of making conversation over overpriced appetizers held very little appeal. But my colleague Fatima had guilt-tripped me into it. "James, you can't skip the holiday dinner. That's the one time they actually spring for decent food." So I put on my good charcoal suit, the one I'd bought for my cousin's wedding in Brampton 2 years earlier, and took the O train downtown. The ballroom at the Chateau Laurier was exactly as impressive as it always is. High vaulted ceilings, warm chandelier light, the kind of architectural detail that reminds you that someone, a long time ago, decided this sit deserved something beautiful. People were grouped in the familiar clusters, senior management near the windows, project leads near the bar, the junior staff orbiting somewhere in between performing enthusiasm. There was a string quartet in the corner playing something I recognized but couldn't name. I got a drink. I found Fatima. We talked for a while about the Senators season, which was painful to discuss. And then I looked across the room and saw Beverly standing alone. She'd arrived late, which was unusual. She came in wearing a deep navy blazer and black dress pants. No holiday dress, just herself in the same composed packaging she always wore to work. But something was off. I could see it immediately even from across the room. Her shoulders were pulled in just slightly. Her jaw was tight. She accepted a glass of wine from a passing server but didn't drink it, just held it like she'd forgotten it was in her hand. And everyone left her alone. Of course they did, because that was the understood social arrangement. Beverly Ashworth occupies her space, you occupy yours, and the distance between you is not awkward but simply expected. She had built that distance herself over years, and everyone had learned to respect it. I don't know what I was thinking. I genuinely don't. Maybe I was just tired enough that my usual calculations had gone offline. Maybe it was the Rickards. Maybe it was something my mother would have done. She was the type to notice when sin struggled and walk toward them instead of away. Whatever it was, I crossed the room. "Not a big fan of the salmon either," I said, because I needed to say something and that was what came out. She looked at me. For a moment I thought I'd made a significant error. Then she said very quietly, "I haven't actually tried it yet." "Probably wise," I said. Something shifted in her expression, but something adjacent to one. "James," she said, like she was confirming I was real. "You came." "Fatima threatened me," I said. This time she almost smiled. Almost. The string quartet had shifted into something slower, and a few couples had drifted onto the small cleared area near the east wall that served as a dance floor. I'm not sure why I said what I said next. It felt absurd even as I was saying it. But the words were already out. "Do you want to dance?" She stared at me. I watched her process it, the surprise, the hesitation, and then something underneath both of those things that I couldn't quite identify yet. "I'm not a particularly good dancer," she said finally. "Neither am I said. "We'll be fine." She set her wine glass down on the windowsill and took my extended hand, and we walked together onto the dance floor. I felt every pair of eyes in the room track us for about 4 seconds before people returned to their own conversations. Beverly moved carefully, precisely the way she did everything, one hand on my shoulder, the other in mine. We kept appropriate distance. This wasn't a movie, but then I felt it. Her hand in mine was trembling. I didn't say anything. I wasn't sure what to say. We moved slowly with the music, and the room sort of fell away around us, the way rooms do sometimes when something important is happening inside a small amount of space. After a long moment, she spoke. Her voice was low, controlled, but there was something underneath the control that was fraying at the edges. She told me she'd received a call that afternoon. From the board. There had been a formal complaint, a significant one, from Reyes Municipal Partners, one of their most important long-term clients, about mismanagement on the Prescott Water Treatment Expansion Project. The complaint named her division specifically. An independent review had been triggered. Depending on what the review found, there could be contract terminations, funding clawbacks, and, she said this last part very quietly, potential questions about her leadership of the division. She had spent 12 years building her reputation at Hartwell, 12 years of arriving first and leaving last and making the calls no one else wanted to make. And in the span of a 40-minute phone call, all of it had been placed under question. As she explained this, her voice didn't break, but it was close, and I understood in that moment something I hadn't understood before. The coldness, the precision, the impossibly high standards. They weren't about indifference, they were armor. They were what you build when you've had to be twice as good as everyone around you just to be taken seriously. And you've decided that the safest thing to do is to become flawless enough that no one can ever say you gave them a reason to doubt you. She had been holding that up for 12 years, and tonight, something had gotten through. I didn't say anything clever. I didn't offer a solution. I just kept moving with the music, and after a moment I said the only thing that felt honest. I told her that for most of my first year on her team, I had believed she had already written me off, that I had a resignation letter saved on my laptop at home, and had been seriously considering submitting it in January. She stopped moving, not completely. We were still technically dancing, but she pulled back just enough to look at me directly. Her expression was something I'd never seen on her face before, not the professional neutrality, not the quiet focus during a project review. "Something raw, James," she said. "Why would you think that?" "Because you never said otherwise," I told her. "When your feedback is that precise, and that consistent, and there's no moment where you just say, 'You're doing well, keep going,' it starts to feel like the feedback is the verdict." She was quiet for a long time, long enough that I started to wonder if I'd said too much. Then she said very carefully, "I have been harder on you than I have been on anyone else on the team in the last 2 years." I didn't say anything. "Not because I wanted you to leave," she said, "because I believed you were the only one who could handle it." She told me she had noticed my work from my first week, the way I structured my project briefs, the way I asked questions that were 3 steps ahead of what the task required, the way I'd flagged a drainage coefficient error on the Glebe corridor file that 2 senior engineers had missed, and brought it to her quietly, without making anyone look bad, just fixed it and moved on. She said she had put my name on a list of candidates for a senior coordinator track that she only updated once a year. Hearing that felt like oxygen after a long time without it. She shook her head slowly, and I could see the regret in it. "I learned a long time ago," she said, "that showing people what you think of them can be used against you or against them, so I stopped." She paused. "That was my mistake, not yours." The music wound down toward something quieter. We slowed with it. And then she said something I hadn't expected. She told me that when she'd arrived at the dinner, her mind had been entirely elsewhere. The call, the review, the Prescott file, the 12 years she was suddenly being asked to justify. And then she saw me across the room, and then I came over, and then I asked her to dance. And for the first time in hours she felt something ease, because someone had walked toward her when every professional instinct suggested walking the other way. "I don't know how to ask for that," she said quietly. "I've never been good at it." We had stopped moving entirely by then. The quartet had paused between songs. The room was doing its thing around us, conversations and clinking glasses, and someone laughing too loudly near the bar. She looked at me, and the composure was still there. Beverly Ashworth was not the type to come undone in a hotel ballroom, but behind it was something honest and exhausted and almost frightened. "Don't hand in that letter," she said. "Please." It wasn't a command the way her directions in the office were commands. It was quieter than that, more careful. It sounded like someone asking for something they weren't sure they had the right to ask for. I thought about the resignation letter, the carefully worded second draft, the clean exit I'd been planning, and then I thought about the Prescott file and the 12 years, and the woman standing in front of me who had spent so long being untouchable that she didn't know anymore how to let someone just stand next to her. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. I meant it. The next 4 months were the hardest stretch of my professional life. The independent review into the Prescott project ran through February, and it was not a comfortable process. Consultants came in from Toronto. There were documents requested, interviews conducted, timelines reconstructed. Beverly was in meetings I wasn't part of, making calls I didn't hear, navigating a process that was clinical and exhausting, and public in all the ways that are hardest. But something was different inside the team. Something had shifted. She started holding shorter, more open check-ins twice a week, not formal reviews, but actual conversations. She'd ask where people were stuck. She'd share context that she'd previously kept at the senior level, reasoning that if her team understood why a decision had been made, they'd execute it better. She started saying out loud when something was done well. Not effusively, she wasn't built for effusive, but directly, specifically. "This risk matrix is the clearest I've seen on a project this size." Small things. But the team noticed. You could feel it in the way people moved through the office, the way conversations in the hallway changed. A little less careful, a little more like people who believed they were in the right place. The review concluded in early March. The findings were mixed. There had been communication gaps on the Prescott project, and the report made specific recommendations about documentation protocols and client escalation procedures. But the review found no evidence of negligence or misconduct, and it noted that once the division had been made aware of the client's concerns, the response had been organized and professional. Beverly kept her position. Rhea's municipal partners, after a series of meetings that I know took everything she had, agreed to continue the contract with a modified oversight structure. It wasn't a clean victory, but it was a real one. By the time spring came and the canal thawed, and people started eating lunch outside again along the Rideau, Hartwell's Eastern Division was in a different place than it had been in December. We'd landed a significant contract with a regional municipality in Northern Ontario, a water infrastructure assessment project that would run for 3 years. Beverly had assembled a project team and, in a move that surprised me enough that I had to read the email twice, she named me as the lead coordinator. I went to her office to ask if she was sure. She looked up from her monitor. "I put your name on a list 14 months ago," she said. "You've been ready for longer than you think." I didn't say much. I thanked her. She nodded in the way she nodded when a conversation had reached its natural end, and I turned to leave. "James," she said. I stopped. "Thank you for the dance," she said. "And for what you said that night. It mattered." I've thought about that evening in the Chateau Laurier ballroom many times since then. The canal half frozen outside the windows. The string quartet playing something I still haven't been able to name. A woman standing alone near the glass, holding a drink she'd forgotten about, carrying something too heavy to carry without anyone noticing. I think about how easy it would have been to turn around, to get another drink and let her stand there, because that was the understood arrangement, because the distance was established, and the rules were clear, and getting involved in someone else's weight is never the simple thing to do. I think about my mother on Wyandotte Street, the way she'd always stop for the person who looked like they needed a moment. Not intrusively, not with a speech, just stopping. Beverly Ashworth is still one of the toughest managers I have ever worked under. She still finds the errors I miss at 11 o'clock at night, and the questions I haven't prepared for in the meetings I think I'm ready for. She is still precise, still demanding, still the kind of leader who makes a room straighten up when she walks in. But there is something else in it now. Something warmer, or not warmer exactly, more visible maybe. Like a window that used to be frosted and is now just clear. Leadership isn't the distance you can maintain between yourself and everyone else. I used to think strength meant needing nothing. I watched her, and I believed that for months. But what I saw that night in the tremble of her hands and the honesty in her voice and the care behind the word please was something different. Strength, real strength, is knowing when to let someone stand beside you, and sometimes the most important decision you make isn't the one in the boardroom or the project brief or the carefully worded email sent at midnight. Sometimes it's just the decision to cross the room,